So today I'm personally very excited about today's podcast. There's very few people that have the perspective on the industry as what our guest does today. A man of vision and action, co-founder and CEO of New Evolution Ventures. NEV doesn't work like a traditional fitness company. It's an umbrella for brands, which I'm sure you all heard of. Crunch, UFC GYMS, Hardcandy, Energy Fitness, YogaWorks, California Fitness, Miss Sporty, amongst several others. They're always moving, expanding, working and changing as they continuously aim to set industry standards one club at a time. You've probably heard his name attached to other high-profile fitness company. Prior to NEV, he was serving 15 years at 24 Hour Fitness. He was the president of the Northwest Division, as well as senior vice president of fitness. And since 2013, he's been the chairman of the board at Crunch, as well as director. So today, we welcome Mr. Jim Rowley to the Escape Your Limits podcast. I did my best on the research. I hope those dates were fairly accurate.
Yeah. Plus or minus a couple of years.
Plus or minus a couple of years. So I always wondered why the sort of global headquarters was in this little place. I looked on the map and when we flew here today, but after coming here I realized it's a very beautiful part of the world.
Right.
So tell us a little bit about the young Jim,
Sure.
What was growing up like, what were some of your early inspirations? And
I grew up, I was born in the Napa Valley, about 45 minutes from here, raised by teenagers. My mom was 17, my dad was 19, and I had an identical twin brother. Not just identical, but mirror twins, which is a very rare form. So had young parents. We grew up in the Northern California area. My dad was an executive in the newspaper business. So he worked for the Napa Register, he worked for the Marin Independent Journal, and we would move basically from newspaper to newspaper, eventually settling here as he was an executive with the Oakland Tribune, which is a big newspaper here. So my formative years were in Northern California, surrounded by family. My father was a Marine. His father served in the Navy, but attached to a Marine unit the entire time. And my mom's dad was a 25-year Navy veteran as well. So a lot of military influence on me. So when I graduated high school, I immediately enlisted in the United States Marine Corps.
Right.
And I spent the better part of the next 8 years as a U.S. Marine.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay. What were some of the key lessons from being in the Marines that you've probably carried over to your business career, would you say?
Yeah, it's a question I get asked often. Some of the answers I think are obvious. The Marine Corps is really established by discipline, by assuming responsibility, by having courage, things like that. And I think all of those kind of cross over. But even before that, having a dad that came from a Marine Corps background and grandfathers who were from a military background, the influences started early, right? So I was drawn to that. I was fascinated by the Vietnam War. I was fascinated by books written about guys coming back. I was fascinated by the way that Americans treated veterans as they came back, because I got to witness a lot of that too. So that kind of pulled me in the direction of the Marine Corps. When I got there, it came very natural for me, probably predetermined, I guess. So when I left, to be honest with you, to start my journey in fitness, I was apprehensive because the feedback that I got while interviewing for a job was negative.
Really? That
I didn't have the skill sets necessary, right? And I think that a lot of Marines or veterans face that. When you leave, you think, oh, I'm capable of, being a platoon leader or a squad leader or carrying a machine gun or driving a heavy truck or being a cook, whatever it might be, but it won't cross over. Right. So naturally, a lot of veterans find their way into law enforcement and things like that. So I was a bit apprehensive, but the entire time I was in the service, my identical twin brother was in the fitness business.
Right.
So when I'm in a hole, literally somewhere in the world, because I spent very little time in the U.S., I would get letters. So this was before computers, this is before cell phones, texting, Snapchat, everything else. I would get letters from my brother talking about, beautiful women, great pay, get to work out every day, and I'm in, the Middle East somewhere, right? So I was drawn to that and fascinated by how he had done in the fitness business. So I applied for a job, and I basically had to beg for my first sales job.
Really?
It took me 2 weeks, 3 interviews, had to call in favors from my brother. My brother called Mark Mastrov saying, hey, can you give this guy a chance? Mark's company was small at the time. We had 14 clubs.
Right.
So
you were trying to get a job at 24-hour
At 24-hour Nautilus at the time.
Okay.
Yeah. So eventually, after calling in every favor possible, I got a chance.
Right.
And from that day forward, I said, I'm going to take everything the Marine Corps taught me, and I'm going to apply it directly to this sales job around having a mission, having a purpose, being disciplined, being organized. In the beginning, it was too much Marine, and I wasn't connecting, right? So I had to get some feedback, that I needed to kind of change my mannerisms. I was too militaristic, too reactionary, all the things that I had been taught, right? So I had to really listen. I had to learn a lot about kind of, being self-aware at that time, because maybe I was too rigid.
Right.
I was also suffering from PTSD and some of those things, and I was a young man, and my mom had just passed a couple of years earlier of cancer. She was only 40 years old, so there was a lot happening at the same time. So I reflected on that, and then I went back and started reading my Marine Corps manuals on how to prepare for mission, and mission over self and things like that. And that really was the first aha moment for me that if I applied these disciplines in an industry where there was a lack of discipline at the time. I mean, you're talking about, there wasn't human resources departments. They were still having parties with alcohol. People would still smoke and have an ashtray out in front of the gym. I mean, it was just crazy, right? It was the Wild Wild West for sure. And I'm this rigid Marine trying to fit into this. So I went back and said, how do I soften my position but use the same characteristics that the Marine Corps taught me? And from there, I just started applying those, and then the promotions started happening fast and furious. And I told myself, I want to be the youngest vice president promoted in the history of this company.
And what were you doing at the time?
I was in sales.
You was a sales.
So I was selling memberships one at a time. And then I became an assistant sales manager, and then a general manager. And I managed 4 clubs as a GM in rapid fire succession. So I would get one turned around, they'd move me to the next one. And I was also building a team, so simultaneously identifying talent within the ranks. And I was in Sacramento, California.
Right.
We went through an acquisition of Family Fitness at that time, so growth and opportunity was right at my doorstep. In the Marine Corps we say, if you have one shot at an opportunity, you better make it count, right? So I really felt kind of mission and purpose. I worked tirelessly. I mean, I worked 6 days a week. Would get in, anywhere from 8 in the morning to 10, depending on the day, and work till 10, 11 o'clock at night till the last sale was done. Worked every Saturday, and applied the Marine Corps philosophy to that.
And what was in that? You mentioned the book that you read. What
Yeah.
were some of the things in that book then?
I mean, really, it's around in the Marine Corps. Before you go on a mission, you have this thing called SMEAC. Military is full of acronyms, right? So there's this acronym called SMEAC, which is a 5-paragraph order. And essentially, you've got a mission objective, and then you're writing these 5 paragraphs as to kind of what you want to achieve over the course of the mission. It includes, kind of alignment of your troops, ensuring that they have the message, communication, having everything necessary, and a clear understanding of what may happen, a plan A and a plan B. So I just started writing down kind of all the things that I wanted to achieve, and then how to achieve them, basically through sales.
Right.
And I just started getting more discipline around that, and eventually, the sales started coming in, and the members were reacting to my style, and then my team members were reacting. I was doing a lot of training and development, teaching people kind of the psychology of how people think and why people aren't fit, and how dissatisfied they might feel not being, a fitness person, and the anxiety that might be associated with walking in the gym. I really started breaking down what it was like to be a member.
Right.
Instead of making it all about the sales aspect of things, I reversed it and started teaching that, and those disciplines were transferred to my team. And look, we succeeded a lot. I kept getting promoted, and life's good.
And I heard a friend of mine and yours as well mention that you use it, and I'm not sure if it's exactly right, but they said you talk about your strategy, but you said that the culture overrides strategy. Is that
right? Well, Peter Drucker said, culture eats strategy for breakfast.
Right.
And that was something that I read early, and I've tried to maintain as a philosophy, that this culture of winning, this culture of being driven, this culture of also not just building rapport with the members, but building relationships.
Right.
Because I think rapport can be fleeting. You know, we can build rapport in a matter of minutes, and then you leave and I leave and we go about our day, and then that's it. There is no relationship. So I try to create connectivity to where there might be things that you could help me with and things that I could help you with outside of the club. Also at the time, and it still holds true today, the majority of the team members are young, right? I've continued to get older. My team's still 24 years old. And when you're 24, you're still finding your way, right? You're finding your way in the city, you're finding your way through jobs, through connectivity, through relationships, things like that. So I wanted the teams to really be the conduit to not only what was happening in the club, but what was happening outside of the club.
Right.
And that comes from building a culture that was based on relationships.
Right. And how do you do that? When you mentioned that you manage multiple locations and people, how do you get what you, I guess, developed yourself, which is quite unique? There's probably not too many people that had that upbringing that you had, but how do you get someone that's 24 years old in a club probably a long way from you to share that same sort of outlook on connecting with members? And
that's a great question. I think the first thing is you have to identify the types of people that are going to succeed in our environment, and B, succeed under your command, because maybe not everybody is going to, but there are types. I found that people that, and I started doing this in the interview process. A lot of people would read the resume and say, oh, you worked for so-and-so and you worked for so-and-so. I take that resume away. I want to know about the individual. What was it like when you were growing up? Were you raised by two parents? What did your parents do? What were the influences that you had? I want to understand the mechanics of this individual. Did you play sports? Were you good at it? Were you okay? Was it a struggle for you? What came natural? Those are the things that I would try to identify, because that would align with what I needed on my team. Right. So I knew that if I found the right people that would follow my guidance, a rising tide lifts all boats. Right. So that's really what it was, around connecting with the team and then building this universal culture, not only of understanding my leadership path, but also of competing with each other. Right. Because you want your team to be competitive. So a lot of time I would look for former military and former athletes, because I know that they've got that competitive drive. Right. They want to be first. Right. Yeah.
And is that something, so in how often is that something you have to constantly be on top of people, or is that something that, once you've got that competitive thing set up, that it just takes on a life of its own without you necessarily having to be on top all the time?
Yeah, it's a little bit of both, because I think that human instinct will kick in eventually, and a lot of people will try to take the path of least resistance. Right. They'll try to cut corners and so forth. So for me, it was around establishing kind of good character. Again, starting with the mission. We all have this mission, identifying what that mission was, gaining alignment through everybody, constant communication, regular meetings and teaching, ensuring you've got that unity, and then traveling from club to club, looking for breakdowns. So where were we breaking down, and then how could I shore that up? And then sometimes people wouldn't fit, and I would cull the herd quickly. I wouldn't. Once I identified that somebody wasn't going to work, I would replace that person, instead of having that person, be malignant inside my group and create a cancerous situation, because negativity tends to look for more negativity, right? Right. So I would get those people out. But you've got to be vigilant. I mean, you have to be. Look, it takes 100% of your effort to be successful. It's not a 90% thing. It takes 100%. And I hear people all the time, this used to be an old term, this work-life balance, right? Right, yeah. And I just don't believe in that. I think in order to be successful, something's going to be unbalanced, right? And if you want to be successful at work, how could that be unbalanced, right? So you've got to find your balance there. And oftentimes I think you have to give a little bit more up of your own personal freedoms, and maybe your family life. You have to give up a little bit of time on that side. Right. So I recognized early that it wasn't about kind of the quantity of time I was spending, because I was raising 3 kids at the same time with my wife, and I started to learn that it really was about the quality, not the quantity. So I still coached on my kids' teams. I still made it to every game. I would ensure that if I was traveling, unless I was overseas, I was home by Friday so I could make the Saturday and Sunday games, things like that, and still tried to be present. And I was fortunate because my wife and I started dating. I was 19, she was 18. So she dated me when I was a Marine and had nothing. It was all over the world, and in combat and war and everything else. And then she was still dating me when I entered the fitness business. So she had a clear understanding of what the time requirements were and what my goals were. So having that alignment helped. Yeah. It relieved a lot of pressure for me to constantly feel that drag to be home. But I hear a lot of people today. And I'm not trying to say it's right or wrong, but like we didn't have paternity leave when I started, where the dad would take 6 weeks off to be home, and I just look at it a little bit different, because I know that an infant is sleeping about 16 hours a day, right? So that leaves 8 hours, and that's spent feeding and changing diapers. There's not a lot of, and I'm not a doctor, but I don't know that there's a lot of bonding that goes on. But I think at a year, at 2 years, that's where the father can really be a part of the child's be impactful. So I don't know where I'm going off tangent here, but my point is that I knew I had to give up something in order to have great success. So I probably cheated my family a little bit more than I cheated my work.
And you've obviously been around and you are successful. Would you say that that's something that if someone's young getting into the industry, that or any kind of business really, that you're going to have to commit a big percentage of your time to that, and your partner and everything, you need to get the right dynamics around that if that's what you really want, would you?
I think you and your partner have to have a shared vision, right? So, and you have to establish what that means. I see a lot of people, I talk about this a lot when I present. I call it will versus want, right? There's a lot of want in the world. I want this or I want that, whether it's a new car, a big home, a big family, a fancy vacation, fancy watch, whatever it might be. There's a lot of want in the world. But what I've noticed is that there's not a lot of people who are drawing the understanding of the will. And by will, I mean, what are you willing to do in order to get what you want?
Right.
What are you willing to sacrifice? Because we all want something, right? I think this lady in New Hampshire just won $560 million in a lottery. Who doesn't want to pay $2 and win $500 million, right? Everybody wants that. But when it comes to work, you have to think about things like perseverance, accountability, responsibility, work ethic. And are you willing to do all of those things in order to get what you want? Yeah. Because not everybody's going to win the lottery, right? So I think in order to succeed in business, you've got to really get determined. It's not about showing up. Yeah. It's about true determination. It's about drive, commitment, And I've watched your podcast, and I've seen a lot of the leaders for decades that you've been interviewing, and they all have the same kind of unique character, which is they're driven. Yeah. And maybe they're longer in their success path now, but you take those guys back 20, 25 years ago in the beginning and you interview that individual. That was a hungry person, a driven person who had a clear understanding of what they wanted, and nothing was going to stop them. And I think now I see a lot of deviation. Yeah. If it doesn't come quick enough here, I'm going to go on to the next thing. If it doesn't come quick enough there, I'm going to go on to the next thing. Yeah. And look, there's a lot of things about millennials that I appreciate. There's a joie de vivre, right? This zest for life. I think they have a strong sense of what's important, but I think that the way that they navigate things is they give up too quickly instead of just persevering, and not bashing millennials. But,
and there's a lot, you see a lot, you read the books, and it's certainly a lot on social media about kind of getting rich fairly quick, and also the term work smart, not hard. Right. Have you experienced anyone that's just worked very smart and managed to get that success without putting a huge amount of work?
No, I haven't. Have you?
I haven't.
No, I mean, I think it's work. I understand the point, work smart, not hard. I mean, you don't want to work dumb, right? Because then it seems like the hard work is all you get. So I think the smart, what they're really talking about is be efficient. Right. And look, that's a great point, because efficiency with your time makes you ultimately more effective, and then you can do more and so forth. But no, to me, it's work smart and work hard.
Both, yeah.
Right, you have to do both. And I wish it was different, but I haven't figured out how to do it. I've only figured out how to work hard, to be honest with you.
Yeah.
I'm still trying to figure out how to work smart.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So yeah, let's pick up where we left off then.
Sure.
So you started managing
Yes.
a group of clubs. Where,
Yes.
where did you go from there?
So I was in Sacramento, and I had, I think, I'd managed 5 or 6 clubs. I got my first promotion to district manager in Reno, Nevada, district of 2. I had 1 in Reno and 1 in Carson City. I acquired both of them on the same day, and so I started in Reno in the morning, drove to Carson City about 40 minutes in the afternoon, and had to get rid of the kegs, the wine refrigerator, the ashtrays. I was a wanted man in northern Nevada in the early 90s because I had a different sense of what fitness was. But that was my first shot. I was a district manager there for 18 months. They moved me back to Sacramento, and I had 10 clubs, and that was in 1997 probably. And so I had 10 or 12 clubs for 2 years, and then I got my first opportunity to be a vice president, promoted to the youngest vice president in the history of the company before the age of 30, and I had 33 clubs. So that was my first big jump. It went from 1 to 2 to 10, then to 33.
Right.
So that was really my big test to see if everything I've been incubating in my mind and testing in these small groups was going to work, and fortunately it did.
Right.
Yeah.
And what was it? So 24 Hour Fitness is a very unique company, you know, particularly prior to the big sale that it had. But being inside that from when it was very small to kind of where it was when they sold, you know, what do you think made them as successful as what they were? What were some of the ingredients that I guess you sort of took from that? Because it wasn't just a normal chain of health clubs. You know, I've met a lot of people who worked there, and there were certainly things that they did very, very differently, and people who have left the company sort of adopt those. But how would you describe some of the, what was the secret sauce there?
Look, I think the genius of Mark Mastrov wasn't being open 24 hours a day. It wasn't that he was really the first to pioneer EFT. It was his ability to identify good people. And,
right.
if you ask me to isolate what the difference was at 24 Hour Fitness during the heyday, it was the people. And I'll still point to people that are in the industry today that all came from that same place.
Right.
It's like in the NFL, we talk about the coaching tree, right? So Bill Walsh, who was the head coach of the 49ers and won several Super Bowls, if you look at his coaching tree of the guys that went out to then be head coaches of their own teams and win Super Bowls, it's tremendous. So why did they all come from that place, right? Bring their own set of unique skill sets, learn under this man, and then be able to go replicate the success. And I think it's really 2 things. It was Mark's ability to identify talent. And look, these weren't Harvard MBAs and Stanford. These are guys that were hardworking, maybe kind of on the fringe in terms of the way they did things, right? These were renegades, but what they were was so committed, so driven that the competition environment was just peaking every single day. And Mark really kind of, I think, spawned that. How do I get all of these guys that maybe don't have a fallback position? They don't have a tremendous resume. They don't have an academic background to fall on. How do I get them to be fierce competitors? And he nurtured that. And those guys then learned the process. So 1, it was the people within 24 Hour Fitness, and 2, it was the process. Right. That process and again, it took decades to get that process to work perfectly.
How long, what was that sort of period from when?
Well, I mean, look, I can remember in the early 90s, the process was, calling leads was a phone book and a phone. Those were the tools you had. When someone came in to register, they registered their name and address on a piece of paper, right? So imagine the evolution of what's your name and address to what's your name and address, how'd you hear about us? So then we could source the marketing. What are you interested in doing in fitness, right? So then doing goal setting with a prospective guest. So just that evolution alone of how we treated the guest and how we identified the source in which they came from so we could spend more wisely, all the way up to integrated computer systems, personal training, tracking member behaviors in the club. We didn't have any of that in the early 90s.
Right.
We just had hustle.
Right.
So over the course of the time there, all of those systems built a process.
Right.
And if you took that process and you took that characteristic of identifying strong talent, it worked in a lot of different places.
Right.
And there's operators all over the world that I worked with when they were in their 20s that are just kicking ass right now.
Yeah.
Same mentality.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And what about the product itself? Do you think some of it was to do with the fact that it was a new concept at the right time, and there wasn't a huge amount of people like there is now, or was the product itself delivering upon what it was meant to?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think it was, look, there wasn't the amount of competition that exists today. There was nowhere near the level of competition back then. It was, we owned markets. We might have been the only player in town other than some mom and pops. But the product was good, it was clean, but most importantly, it was fun. I think the 24-hour fitness in the 90s and 2000s, it was like the nightclub of the 70s and 80s, right? Because it was a fun place to be, but without the smoke and alcohol, it was replaced with that fitness energy, right? So everybody wanted to have a membership. It was a good identity to say that I'm a fitness person and I work out at 24-hour fitness. And that was popularized, I think, by the supermodels that were associated with 24-hour fitness, the ad campaigns and everything. So you take that and then you have massive expansion through acquisition. You get a big geography. You start in the 80s with one club, and by the late 90s, early 2000s, you're at 200, and then you grow in the next 10 years to 400, right? So there was massive geography. And then all those guys that incubated in Northern California, when we only had 30, 40, 50 clubs, those guys were just waiting to get out, right? So finally, one goes to Hawaii, one goes to Portland, one goes to San Diego, one goes to Dallas, one goes to New York. And now you have all these guys that incubated under one small market, coveting the entire United States.
Right.
So I think that was the ingredient. You had great people, you had a great environment, good product, and strong geography.
Right.
Yeah.
So what happened then? You got to a stage where you thought, look, we've created this, it's time to move on and sell. What happened around that time?
Well, look, I think this is the thing that most people don't understand about fitness is when you grow, oftentimes it requires capital, and that capital comes from a third party.
Right.
And that third party, while they want to put money to work and they want to earn interest on their money, what they're really looking for is an exit. Right. So I think what happened, and I was out working in the club, so I wasn't making these decisions, but what happened is it got to the point where the people that had made the investment in 24-hour fitness were looking to capitalize on their return. So eventually it got to the point where they kept making more money and more money. They kept staying in the deal, but then at some point they're like, we've got to sell this thing. And I think that's really what drove it in 2005, was that the capital source was ready to do something else.
Yeah. So what in terms of your career then? What did you stay on, or did you sort of, when it sold, move?
Yeah.
Move out?
So in 2002, I took on the position of Senior Vice President of Fitness, which is basically managing the entire personal training department and supplement sales. And I did that for several years. That was I really enjoyed that. That was a great part of my career. Had a great partner in Derek Gallup, who was was on the subs and retail side, and then came over with me, and we took a business that was doing about 90 million in personal training. We took it to 300 million. And then after the sale, new leadership came in. Mark ascended to chairman, and the new group came in, and they tapped me to do kind of an HR role, if you can imagine, like a human resources role, taking the existing infrastructure of the company and saying, is this the best way for us to manage our organization? Because we were somewhat siloed at that point. We had a fitness silo, a operations silo, and a sales silo. So I spent the better part of a year working on new compensation plans, new org structure, ways to identify talent, and that was a crazy year for me, to be removed from everything I'd done for 15 years and to go into this HR role, working with consultants and so forth. But I learned a lot about myself, and I'm surrounded by Stanford MBAs from Bain at that time, and here I am, a guy with a high school education, managing this process. So it was quite interesting. And then after that process ended, I stepped in as we had 3 presidents in the company, 2 in the U.S. and 1 in Asia, and I assumed one of the roles as president.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Okay.
So.
And then so what was the move to NEV?
Yeah, I think that by 2008 or 2007, I'd been there since 1992. So when the sale happened, the paradigm started to shift a little bit from a philosophy standpoint. Right. New leadership comes in, they've got new ideas, they've got their own team that comes in, and I felt like maybe philosophically I wasn't aligned with where they were going directionally. Not that they were good people, they were very smart people, they have done great things, but it wasn't aligned with what I wanted to do. So I decided to leave, and I'd reached my highest point in terms of title. I had reached my highest point in terms of income, and I had 3 kids in private school, a mortgage, I had everything, and just said this isn't where I want to be. Right. And I resigned on April 1st, 2008.
Right.
Yeah.
And did you know where you was going after that?
I had no clue. I had no clue. I just had, I knew that wasn't where I wanted to be after 15 or 16 years. Yeah. And I knew, I was confident in myself that I could find something. And I was scared.
Really?
Yeah.
Why?
Well, because I'd always been paid well, but I'd never amassed a fortune at that time. So when you're, I was 40 years old. I had three kids, like I said, and I'm going to zero income. So the first couple weeks, I was like, this is great. Just relaxing, having no schedule, no itinerary. I had lived in planes and hotels for since 1999, basically. And
what about your partner? What was
with Mark?
No, your
my wife.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think she enjoyed the first 2 weeks, and then after that she was like, "You've got to go back to work." So, meanwhile, we had on the way to take our kids to school. There was this home that my wife always loved, and said one day, we're gonna buy this home, and everybody would tell us that home's never going to be for sale. Those people bought it, built it, as their dream home and everything else. So I resigned. I'm out of work 2 weeks. That home comes up for sale. So not only do I not have a job, but we go buy, my wife's dream home and sign up for an even bigger mortgage, and we move. And I mean, it was one of those times where you really just have to trust yourself and trust your instinct. And then I got a call from Mastrov saying, let's have lunch. And that was kind of the spark. And he and I had a separate investment in Chile, right, in Santiago, Chile, that we had done together in 2004. So outside of being an employee with him, I had done, partnered with him on another deal. And we had lunch, and he's like, well, what do you want to do? And I said, well, I've been retired 2 weeks. I can tell you that this isn't going to last long. I mean, I was already like, everybody my age was still working. It wasn't like I had people to just associate with all the time. I didn't golf, right? So once I got my workout done, it was like there wasn't much to do. And I told myself I would take 3 or 4 months and before I would even do anything. And 2 weeks had passed. And he and I started having conversations about kind of the evolution of fitness. And that's really where our name came from, which is, right, how was fitness evolving at the time? Yeah. And New Evolution Ventures was born over the course of the next 6 months. Right. And it was really about, instead of having one brand with a massive geography that looks the same, I mean, you could basically have put me on a plane blindfolded, drop me at any mall in America, and I couldn't have told you where I was, whether I was in Texas or Nebraska or California. And this concept was, how do we aggregate multiple brands? How do we have, as it's turned out, all the way from YogaWorks to UFC, right? From Namaste to getting punched in the face, because it allows us to learn from each of those brands, understand member behaviors and so forth. It's also more exciting to have multiple brands simultaneously. So that's what we started with, was just this idea, and started taking some meetings. And
do you think that was sort of like you'd been with, I guess, a big mass market brand? Do you think that you after learning what you did from that, you felt that probably the market was evolving and there was opportunities in different parts, different sectors of the market. I guess more fragmentation of, instead of a one size fits all, more of a personalized. Was that part of?
That's exactly right. Just starting to understand the market trends and really just watching the behaviors of people in our existing clubs, and also understanding that within a club you could see people that were focused on spin, focused on group fitness only, aerobics classes, focused on personal training. And then in the 90s, I don't know, I don't want to pat myself on the back, but I think I was one of the first ones to really expand functional training, like putting turf in clubs and expanding the workout space to the floor and everything else. We started to recognize these trends and saying, okay, along with those trends, what else is happening from a member base standpoint? And you started to see the early days of this price separation happening too, where what we now call kind of the barbell strategy, where you've got a low end and you've got kind of a high end. And we were concerned.
When you say barbell, what just?
So two ends, right?
Okay.
So on a barbell, you've got plates on one side and plates on the other. And we started thinking of it as a price, like a barbell. You've got the low price on one side and the high price on the other. What's going to happen in the middle?
Right.
And not saying that we were going to predict anything, but we saw that there was this diversification happening where the member base was starting to go in two directions.
Right.
And we felt like that middle place was not the place to be.
Right.
So that's really kind of where our business started gravitating towards. And you take the specialty idea of UFC and saying, okay, the UFC was simultaneously starting to become very popular. So a phone call and an introduction, we have a meeting with the UFC guys, and who are all fitness enthusiasts. Come to find out, Dana White, who's the president, used to be an instructor for 24-hour fitness in San Diego, years and years ago, right? And Lorenzo Fertitta, who was the founder of the UFC, as we know it today, was big into fitness, and they wanted to attract more people to UFC, but not from a fighting standpoint, more from a fitness standpoint. So I spent the better part of a year kind of following their fighters and their camps and really understanding kind of the modalities that they were using in their training, because they were incredibly well trained. I mean, to fight for 15 minutes, to defend yourself, to have the cardio, the strength, the jiu-jitsu, wrestling, everything. I wanted to know how they physically trained. So we did that, and then the idea just kind of organically became, this has got to be a gym concept where instead of going to a dojo to do jiu-jitsu or your MMA techniques, you bring it all under one roof, you surround it with traditional fitness, and then you have this big functional complement.
Right.
And that's where the idea was born.
Right. Was that the first one that you did as NEV then, the UFC?
It's hard to remember because they all kind of happened simultaneously. So the market had a small investment in YogaWorks, and that became a larger investment when NEV started. Crunch was calling us simultaneously saying, hey, can you help us rescue this business? And UFC, I was whiteboarding, I was kind of creating this company in my office. That was all happening simultaneously in 2009. 2008, 2009. So I don't know which came first, to be honest with you. They all kind of happened at the same time. Yeah.
Was there a lot of pressure on you and the team at that time? Because I guess, after having what would be sort of like a huge success with 24-hour and then going into something like UFC, which I guess, I was listening to an interview the other day about the start of UFC and how, it was sort of human cockfighting they used to describe it, how sort of very un-mainstream it was, and then sort of going from a successful mainstream gym concept into something that's different. Was there a lot of pressure on you all in terms of?
Oh yeah, there was a ton of pressure. I think you grab your balls, you grab your belief, and you just leap, right? You've got to go for it. You've got to trust that your idea is going to work. I think this is what separates successful entrepreneurs from people who want to be entrepreneurs, is that risk.
Right.
Your ability to truly take risk your own capital, risk your own time, take your idea and really jump. And once you jump, you have to go for it. So we made some mistakes along the way, but we always trusted in the process, trusted in each other. Mike Feeney had joined the team at the time, so that really helped us from a construction, design, equipment purchasing standpoint. Adam Sedlak joined us on the UFC side. He was really kind of the spearhead for that group. And then we just kept working an idea to the point where we thought we had it right. And then we opened our first site near here, so it would be close to us. But pressure, yeah. I mean, I can't remember the last time I didn't have pressure, to be honest with you. If you ask me, when was the last time you didn't feel pressure? I don't know. It'd probably be like in the 8th grade or something.
Really?
Yeah.
Do you thrive off that?
I don't know that I thrive off it, but I embrace it for what it is. It ignites something inside of me that's where you have this guy who maybe lacks confidence because I don't have a formal education, or I didn't I wasn't a upper crust kid, I was a middle class kid or whatever. Whatever ignites that drive in me, I guess you could call it pressure, or the fear of failing,
right?
Or that people said you couldn't do it. That definitely ignites something in me, and I'm a pretty determined person. Yeah.
What do you do when you get those times where you do get into that state of pressure and maybe you question yourself? Have you got mentors? Do you go inside and pull yourself up? How do you deal with that?
Yeah, I go inside mostly. I'm not a big alcohol guy, so I don't turn to the bottle to relieve pressure. I try to keep my family away from a lot of the pressure that I'm feeling. So I internalize a lot, and then I lift heavy weights. That really is that's one of the purest things for me is, and people will probably call it an old-fashioned workout, but a bench press, a lat pull down, a military press, a squat, a deadlift, that humbles me, right? That quickly, and then I sweat and I stop thinking about the pressure, and I start thinking about performing better underneath that barbell, right? Yeah. So exercise for me, it's always been a great outlet, and it allows me to relieve the steam. And then, especially if I'm under a significant amount of pressure or stress, I come to the gym first before I go home, so that I'm not bringing any of that into the household. Yeah. But again, I've got my wife as a trusted partner, so I try to get it to the very manageable point before I share anything with her, because I don't want her to worry. No. That I'm under undue amounts of pressure. But look, we've got multiple companies all over the world. I mean, we've got a headquarters in Sydney, Australia. We've got a headquarters in Mexico City. We've got a home office in Orange County. We've got a home office in Manhattan, right? They all have great business leaders. They all have great teams, but not everybody performs amazing all of the time, right? Yeah. So there's different pressure points, and sometimes they're far away. Yeah. And then there's the pressure to perform for your partners. There's the pressure to perform for your investors, your board, your team. You never want to let your team down. I mean, it comes from all angles. So to say that there's a point where there's no pressure is just I've never experienced that.
No. I've heard you're a big fan of the Art of War book. What part of that interests you, and how do you relate that to what you do in your business now?
Yeah, it was required reading when I was in the Marine Corps.
Really?
So one of our commandants, I don't know if it was Commandant Gray or after, but they started to require that we read books, and Sun Tzu, The Art of War was one of the first requirements. And it's an incredibly difficult read.
Yeah,
I mean,
I've tried it.
It's very old, right? 400 or 500 years old. It's around philosophy and military philosophy, and so that part intrigued me a little bit. But once I started to break down by reading the paragraphs over and over and over again and really trying to understand what it meant, there were passages in there that just hit me right in the chest. I mean, talking about advantage, talking about position over your enemy, talking about, imagine the philosophy of saying, never back your enemy into a corner. Always allow them a place to escape, because if you back them into a corner, they will fight to the death, right, and you will both lose, right? So imagine that. So even in competition, even in, how does that work from an employment standpoint? You never want to back an employee into a corner. You never want to back a competitor into a corner. Always leave them an exit, and ideally a graceful exit. But one of the quotes that Sun Tzu said too was, and they talk about timing, they talk about advantage, they talk about how to treat your men. But But one of the passages that just always stuck with me was, treat your men as you would your own beloved sons, and they will follow you into the deepest valley. So I have a son, right? And I have 2 daughters. And when you think about how you would treat your children in terms of shelter, in terms of food, in terms of opportunity, in terms of nurturing, in terms of positive reinforcement, all those things. Why can't we do the same thing with our team members, right? Why can't we treat them as we would our own beloved sons? And then in return, what do they get back from you? And look, I'm not naive. Sometimes you treat your team that way and they still burn you. They steal, they lie, they do things out of character, they don't represent the brand that you want. And the larger you get, unfortunately, the more you have of that.
Right.
But I've really tried to identify with the needs of the team members and really tried to be compassionate about how much pay they make, how many hours they work, what are the conditions like, what's the culture like. And I take it personal.
Yeah.
I do. I'm not perfect. I make mistakes, and the bigger my responsibilities, unfortunately, it doesn't seem like I can get to all the people all the time. But I've really tried to establish that we care for our team members, and hopefully that trickles down to our business leaders and so on and so forth. But look, you got to care for your team. I understand how hard it is. This job is a grind. It never stops. We're rarely closed. I think Christmas, right? And the expectations are high, and the performance outcomes. We establish goals, and we expect people to achieve them, and that creates pressure.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. So with the changes, you've talked about them, the barbell changes in the industry, the low cost, the boutiques coming in. What do you see for the next few years in terms of where's the industry going? What's your predictions on what the space is going to look like?
Look, I don't have a crystal ball, but I think about this a lot, and I don't want to make any predictions, but I feel like we're really at an impasse right now where the boutiques have come in, and while they might only take 400 members, their need might only be 400 members, where a big club might need 10 times that to succeed. Right. There's been so many, like a swarm of competition, right? Death by 1,000 cuts, that I think that when you're facing down multiple boutiques, plus the big boys all simultaneously, it's created some fatigue in our industry. And it's created a lot of downward pressure on the markets. And I've got clubs in certain markets where we're literally surrounded, or we're surrounding our competition, either way, where you can't walk 4 doors down and not see a boutique offering or one of the big boys or multiple big boys all simultaneously on the same block. Okay, there's basically zero barrier for entry. Anybody who's got a new jumping jack idea can open a 400 square foot, boutique gym. And my prediction, if you will, is that there's going to be a lot of compression on those small groups, and they might have a good idea, but once they start to turn over their member bases and find that, there's a small group of people that like to use them, it's not enough to sustain long-term growth and opportunity. Plus rents are going up, labor's going up. You've got to have some real girth behind you in order to face that. Right. And so I think there's going to be, we saw a lot of expansion in that area. My belief is we're going to see contraction on the boutique side. Not all of them are going to survive. I think the same thing is going to happen on the big box side. I think that not everybody's going to survive this onslaught, and it's going to be only the strong that will. Strong business plans, strong culture, strong teams, good pricing, and some discipline. You can't chase the money down. If you're at a mid-tier or a high tier, you can't just chase the price down and devalue your product. Simultaneously, you've got the low price, which those clubs are only getting bigger, the offerings are getting bigger, and the price is staying the same. So it's a very interesting dynamic. So at New Evolution Ventures, as I stated earlier, we're on both sides. Right. We like to think we have, kind of mid to high price, and we've got the low price covered. So we're doing both, and we believe that both are going to survive. Yeah. The interesting thing will be who's going to falter in the middle. Yeah. Now, with that said, the big advantage of being in fitness right now is that retail is collapsing. So the mall that we knew, 10 years ago is going to look completely different in the next 5 years. Big box retailers are going away. So that space has got to be filled with something. We believe it's going to be filled with fitness, entertainment, and food.
Right.
Yeah. So where we never had an opportunity maybe before to open a gym with a giant parking field, right? That those opportunities will exist. But you have to be well capitalized. You've got to have a good brand. You have to have a strong team in order to take down, mall anchors too.
Yeah. So what you're saying is really, it's I guess cream rises to the top.
That's
so
right.
if you're doing things well-run business, you're going to succeed.
That's right.
If you're not, at some point the cracks will show.
Well, look, it's all about building the foundation. The foundation is built with strong process, I think good morals and values within your company, strong team. That builds your foundation. From there, having the right idea, right pricing, marketing mechanism, and everything else allows you to succeed. But look, there's a lot of competition. There's a lot of people in fitness. I guess the guys that really kind of paved the way for all of us made it look too easy, so that everybody wants to be involved in it. And why wouldn't you? It's healthy. It doesn't come from a negative place. It attracts smart people, fit people, people who are like-minded. I mean, it's a good place to be. But it's hard. Anybody who says this business is easy is lying. It's very hard.
Yeah.
But
there's someone who's been through it already.
But there's a lot of joy that comes from it too.
So just before we end, couple of quick questions. So do you read or listen to any podcasts or books? And if so, what are you currently reading or listening to?
Yeah. So in 2018, I'm taking a break. I'm not listening to any outside influence right now. I really want to get centered with my own thoughts and start thinking about some of the questions you're asking. What's happening with the industry? And I don't want to be clouded by other people's thoughts on how to run a business or how to be a leader or how to treat a millennial or whatever. I want to really internalize that and come up with my own idea. I've read all the books, and I've gotten great value from a lot of them. But at the same time, they start to be a bit repetitive sometimes, or it's just somebody's spin on the same idea.
Right.
I want to originate the next idea. I don't want it to come from another influence.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's interesting. It's a nice perspective. I think there's a balance. Or question to you then. Do you think there's a balance depending on sort of where you are, how old you are? When you're younger, do you think that's a sort of an interesting place to be? Forget about what everybody says and just trust yourself, or do you think, you would absorb that information and get to a stage where you want to make your decisions?
That's a great question. I think it's a little bit of both. I think that I've done this a couple times in my life where I've retreated to have my own reflection and my own introspection and everything else and say, okay, well, what do you know?
Right.
What do you think? What's your idea? And how do you believe that people are acting and reacting? And then other times I'll read 25 books in a year, right? So it's like, okay, what are people saying? So I go back and forth. And right now I want to, well, first of all, I feel like we're all too plugged in. We're plugged in from a media standpoint, from Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, CNN, Fox News, and I just feel like I'm a bit overwhelmed with information, regardless of your political beliefs. We're inundated daily with, the current president and his goings on, and then everybody attacking each other. And I also think we're too plugged in. I think that, I don't need to know what you had for lunch on your Instagram photo today, right? So I'm trying to push back a little bit, get centered. But I've done both.
Yeah.
But right now, just with where our companies are, I want to originate the next idea. Yeah. I want it to be organic, and whether that idea is going to be around a new exercise, the way we're going to treat our personnel going forward, a new gym concept, or how we're going to move this business even further forward. Yeah. I want that to germinate here.
Yeah, that's a great answer. I like that one. What would you say is your biggest career failure or disappointment, and how did you overcome it?
My only career failures and disappointments are always around people. When I trusted somebody and I treated them, I think, fairly. I gave myself to them in terms of inspiration, motivation, maybe process, how to do things. And when people leave you to chase a buck, right? That means I didn't leave the right impression. If you're just chasing money, then I wasn't a good leader. I didn't change your impression of things. Because I think you need to chase your passion, not your pension.
Yeah.
You know, and so I've been disappointed by people. That's where I've trusted people and they've lied, cheated, stolen. That always burns me. It still burns me today. I can tell you names of people where I'm like, man. Or where we did a deal with the wrong person and it was a bad person or a bad idea, and maybe we got caught up in, you know, the thrill of doing a new deal and didn't look under every rock and every corner, and we inherited something maybe that wasn't as it was advertised.
Yeah.
That's where I've made mistakes. Yeah. I probably learned this mostly in my 40s. Like, trust your gut. You're right.
Yeah.
You know, so now I say no. I say no a lot more now.
Yeah.
Where, you know, sometimes you get other influences. People get excited about a deal. You've got other partners. You've got other investors, and everybody loves a deal because it's new, right? The shiny new thing. And now I say no more. I trust myself more to say no.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. So, what would the 30-year-old version of yourself say to you today with absolute conviction, but would be totally wrong about it?
That's interesting. Wow. With absolute conviction, be totally wrong. I think he would have said, the harder you work, the luckier you get. Because that was something that I was thinking about when I was 30.
Yeah.
That it was all about hard work, and hard work creates luck, and that's not the case.
No?
No. Hard work creates more hard work. I think I've never been lucky in business. I think it's always come from something that, you know, we've cultivated.
Right.
You know, I wasn't lucky to come up with the UFC gym idea with my partners. That wasn't luck. That was hard work. I mean, it was a lot of risk involved in that, and it's taken a lot of time and attention. You know, I wasn't lucky that Angelo Gordon, who owned Crunch, called us and said, hey, can you help us, you know, bring Crunch out of where it currently is? That wasn't luck. That was years of hard work creating a reputation where somebody would call you.
Right.
I wasn't lucky. And when I was 30, I thought, oh, the harder you work, the luckier you get. You know, I haven't found any luck yet.
Right.
I found more hard work.
So hard work, but the luck element is, you know, none of your success comes down to that, you would say?
No, there's nothing lucky.
No.
No.
What's your next big personal goal, which is on your list?
Personal goal?
Yeah.
I think, well, I'd like to get down to 225 pounds. I'm currently about 240, so I'd like to get down to 225. That's a personal fitness goal.
Yeah.
I think that one of the goals I have is to just be more present around, you know, my kids. And because I tend to get obsessed with work, and I get obsessed with what's happening, and I've tried really hard to just be cognizant of what they're saying and what they're sharing and what they're interested in. And my kids are a little older now.
How old are they?
My oldest daughter, Jordan, is 21. She's graduating from Boston College in May. My son is 20. He's a sophomore at University of Arizona. And my youngest is 16. She's a junior at a local Catholic school here. And I felt for a long time, I was there and I was listening and I would provide perspective. And I'll share with you, I actually got a treat last year. I was presenting at a business conference, and I asked my son to join. And he was 19 years old. And we had rented a theater, and I'd done the presentation. I was going through the Q&A. And the audience was full of 25, 26, 35, 36-year-olds and so forth. And I was asking them what their key takeaways were from the conference and so forth. And my 19-year-old boy stood up and said, these are my key takeaways. And not only was he articulate, he had a significant offering to share with the audience. In my view, better than a lot of the older people in the audience. And he said, but it's an unfair advantage because I was raised this way. And those are the characteristics of a leader that have been with me since I was born. And I mean, it was one of the proudest moments of my life. So when I say I want to have more perspective and be more cognizant with my kids, it's because I got positive feedback that I have made a difference, but I want to keep making that difference. Just because they're in their early 20s, it's not time to shove them out of the nest. I really want to, I want us to have joy together.
Yeah.
And so I want us to, we travel a lot. We're active when we travel, but I feel like still I still want to connect more.
Yeah.
And really it's a bit selfish because they're in their 20s. Most of my team members are in their 20s.
Yeah.
So the way that they're looking at things and the way that they look at life and they look at a paycheck and they look at paying taxes and going to work, I want to understand that perspective more. And in order to do that, I've got to be present.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think that's the challenge all of us have. I'm certainly the same. It's very easy when you're driven to enjoy the work to sort of be totally in there when you're in work, and also when you come home to still have things going. And
exactly.
I think, I'm with you on that one. I need to sort of also find the time of just focusing on them and not be sort of part distracted with
exactly
other things.
Yeah. How old are your kids?
6 and 7, so they're a lot younger, and I want to do my best whilst they, because they've grown up. Those 6 years have just gone so quickly.
Yeah, exactly.
I want to make sure I don't miss any more, really.
You don't want to wake up and they're 14 and they feel like you weren't there, right?
Yeah.
That was a lot of pressure. Again, the word pressure, right? Pressure for me as a dad was, I read a book that said, be active, be present when they're 4 and 5. Because if you're not, you'll wake up and they're 15 and there's no turning back.
No.
Right? Because a teenager will turn its back on you quickly. And if you haven't made, if you haven't identified as a resource for them, not only as a parent, but as a source of light, as a source of inspiration, as a source of intelligence, they're not going to lean on you.
Right.
So again, having my son stand up and do that at 19, it was literally like validation.
Yeah,
like, are you kidding me? Like, it's working. Yeah. So that was a beautiful moment.
Great. So final question.
Yep.
So escape your limits is about overcoming what you've been told or society says has got you to believe is impossible, and to make it possible. So what would be your most memorable example of escaping your own limits?
Well, I think we touched on it earlier. My self-confidence when I started in the fitness business, while as a Marine, highly self-confident, I felt invincible. But when I transitioned, in the Marine Corps, we say you don't transition from being in the military to being a civilian. You transition to being a veteran.
Right.
Because you're never going to think like a civilian again.
Yeah.
Right? But imagine now having to work with civilians and live in a civilian life and everything else. So my confidence was pretty low,
Right.
that I could actually succeed at something other than being behind an M16 and leading 19-year-old men into conflict, right? So my self-confidence was low, and I really had to kind of harness my own belief that I was capable. And the other thing that was, it sat on my shoulders for almost 15 years. You're not an educated man. You don't have a degree from a 4-year college, and everybody else does.
Right.
So I pushed myself to read every book I could that they could have been reading in college, because other than doing assignments, what were they primarily doing? They were reading about something, whether it was science, math, history, English, reading the great literature of the world, whatever it might be. And so I pushed myself on that. And then I also said, the Marine Corps, I was in some specialty units where we got a lot of attention around psychology, around how people think and how they think in certain situations and what behaviorally what you can learn from them. So I just said, well, why not me? Why can't I harness those things? But it was really about, not believing in myself and everything else. That's what the biggest hurdle was for me in the beginning. And once that switch came on, no, you're prepared.
Yeah.
You're more than prepared. Actually, you're more prepared than everybody else. And once I believed that, and I just, and I've said it before, I just said I'm going to step on the throat of my competition. And that, some people think I'm intense, and some people think that it comes from a dark place or whatever. It comes from a dark place is right, but it's drive. I just harnessed that.
Yeah.
So
own, I guess, what you are. And
own it.
Yeah.
Own it. Don't shy away from that. Own it. You know, I talk a lot about in my presentations about having an X factor. And I think in order to be, you know, a charismatic leader, in order to be a leader who can reach people on multiple dimensions, you do have to have something that is X quality, right? And how do you define an X quality?
Yeah.
You don't. That's the factor, right? So there's got to be some mystery. There's got to be something, I think, when people are trying to figure out what that is, not to create fear or intimidation, but to create that sense of wonder.
Yeah.
And where does this come from? I mean, how could this guy be like this? Okay, keep thinking about it. Meanwhile, I'm working.
Well, that's a great place to end. Jim, it's inspiration. I appreciate your time. Thanks for inviting me over.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah.
I enjoyed it. I know you've spoken to some great leaders in the industry, and to be cataloged with those great people is really my honor. So thank you.
Thank you, Jim.
Yeah. All right.
Hey, I hope you enjoyed this podcast. If you did, then please go over to iTunes and subscribe to the Escape Your Limits podcast. Leave a review, leave a comment. It really would help us a lot to continue to keep these going.